I'm John Henry, Chairman of the Committee for the Republic. The committee hosts two different types of events. We do monthly salons and we do Defender of Liberty Awards. And tonight we have a double header. We're combining an award ceremony with a salon. The committee reserves its Defender of Liberty Awards to a precious few, a band of sisters and brothers. They're heroines and heroes because they risk personal adversity to safeguard truth as the coin of the realm. They inspire courage in the hearts and minds of the living. The good they do lives after them. They are not burdened by ulterior motives. Their burden is their unruffled insistence on the search for truth and the exposure of lies. They don't hesitate to pay the price liberty demands. I will now introduce you to our three award recipients tonight. Nicole, I don't know if Nicole's on, but let's start with Connie Gruber. Connie, are you there? I see you on.
I'm actually here, but Trish and I had prepared, to tell you a little bit about our story, and we were going to share in that with whenever it's appropriate, and Trish would begin. Okay,
I'm going to hand it off to Trish in just why don't we do that while we're waiting for Nicole to get connected.
I'm here.
Nicole's here. Where are you, Nicole? I don't see.
I don't know where I am on your computer.
I'm looking for you.
Oh, there she is.
Oh, there you are. Great. Terrific. So you're in Colorado, right?
No, I am actually in San Diego now. I'm all over the place.
Oh my God, you're all over the place. Terrific.
Yes.
So,
hey, Nicole, long time no see. It's Fogel.
So let's go ahead, Connie. Let's who's going to go first? Connie, the joint statement. How do you want to do it?
Okay, I think Trish was going to begin. Is that right, Trish?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, Lieutenant Colonel John Brow was precise with blue eyes that would thoroughly convey a message. A graduate of Auburn University, he loved his family with his entire being, his wife Trish and their two young sons, Mike and Matt. USMC Major Brooks Gruber's infectious grin and humor made him a joy to be around. A graduate of Virginia Military Institute, he loved his family, his wife Connie, and their precious new baby girl, Brooke. Lieutenant Colonel Brow was a KC-130 pilot with thousands of hours in the aircraft. Major Brooks Gruber was a CH-53 pilot with thousands of hours in his aircraft. These Osprey pioneer pilots were highly regarded as skilled, knowledgeable, and respected professionals in their aviation communities. Both Marines were proud and excited about the future of the Marine Corps' new aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber were among the top 6 Marine Corps pilots handpicked when selected as members of the elite multi-service operational test team, the B-22 MOT. They believed the aircraft mission and committed to safe, successful operation evaluation of the Osprey. Unfortunately, time-driven testing rather than event-driven testing was continuously imposed upon the MOT. Vortex ring state, well known and understood by the pilots, but they did not know where the critical area was for the MV-22. And because the planned developmental testing was minimized and rescheduled to follow-on testing after the operational testing. You up, Connie?
I'm up. I'll take it from there. So when the April 8th, 2000 Arizona crash happened, in which Brooks and John were involved, it was followed by a North Carolina crash on December 11th, 2000, same year. So after the loss of 23 lives, the way we felt was finally the MV-22 was returned to its makers for 2 years. That involved the developmental test and redesigns. Afterwards, the NATOPS manuals were also rewritten. They had updated safety procedures that our husbands did not have. Life-saving auditory and visual warning systems were installed that Brooks and John, their crew, did not have. And this was to prevent these type accidents from happening again. And we hope that will hold true. So it's important to understand that because 2000 was a critical year for congressional funding, the Marine Corps refused, I asked personally, refused to correct their original press release, which Trish and I knew erroneously declared, front page, the pilot's drive to complete the mission was the fatal factor. So this wording, we believe, was intentionally created to publicly place blame directly on Major Gruber and Lieutenant Colonel Brow. So this was in an effort to deflect from the hidden dangers of the Osprey. Brooks and John discovered that. It was a direct result, we felt, of the skipped, inadequate vortex ring state, developmental testing, and training. The press began to refer to the program as a runaway train. So, however, as their unwavering widows, Trish and I, along with faithful supporters of the pilot, sometimes it felt like just a handful. It was hard to get anyone to step forward to help us. We fought long and hard for over 16 years to clear the pilots' names. So many times we felt like giving up. While the Marine Corps chose to protect the aircraft over the pilots who flew it. That was even after, keep in mind, there was the 2001 Blue Ribbon Panel meeting. We were there in DC, Trish and I spoke. That was the V-22 Blue Ribbon Panel. It convened and it determined the Osprey they flew was nowhere near ready for operational test or use. Yet, the professional reputation of both the fallen pilots continued to be sacrificed throughout the years. This was in the press. I live in Jacksonville. I saw a lot of local news. Let anything happen that involved the Osprey, they bring up the accident. And it was always interpreted as pilot error. Although the Marine Corps softened it, with human factors errors. So if Trish and I complained, that's what we'd be told. But yet the press would interpret it as all of us would, that it was pilot error. So we even saw a Discovery Channel special on the Osprey, and that was hitting us more and more clear that, hey, this is part of the military aviation history of the Osprey. And we knew it was going to be retold in the way they were telling it. And our children, the three children involved, my daughter Brooke, Mike and Matt, would always be defending their fathers for years to come. And as you know, Trish and I just could not live with that. So we wanted the pioneering history of the MV-22 to be corrected. And so it was, let's see, next, guess who? It was North Carolina Congressman Walter B. Jones, who courageously took up the fight. Trish and I were exhausted, right, Trish? Just so alone in this fight, and it was so big to fight. But thank God for him. He stepped forward. He led the mission. He talked to I don't know how many people. He finally found Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work. Remember himself, he was a former Marine, so it made it all the more glorious. He did not ignore the truth. The truth came in 2001 from the Blue Ribbon Panel, yet we worked over a decade, nearly 2 decades on this. So he did not ignore the findings of the V-22 Blue Ribbon Panel. He would publicly disagree with the press release. He would correct it. And he ultimately, officially, what we say, he completed the final mission. Congressman Jones took it on. We felt the nonsense finally ended. The truth came out, through Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Work. The final mission, we called it, of bringing Lieutenant Colonel John Brow and Major Brooks Gruber home. And we said honorably home from the desert sands of Marana, Arizona. We felt, and Congressman Jones did too, they were left out there. They were left behind. So Trish and I want to note a very favorite Voltaire quote of encouragement that Congressman Jones shared with both our families. Our children have grown up with it. They believe in it. They stand by it throughout this entire journey to justice for our two families. He would often remind all of us, we said these few but powerful words, quote, to the living, we owe respect, but to the dead, we owe only the truth. So that's our story, and we're just so thankful to be here. We're thankful for this group. We feel a real connection with Nicole, and so sorry for, your loss, your family's loss, and just happy for the justice that you have seen as well. I would say to the committee, please keep fighting, because I think of so many families that maybe don't have a Congressman Jones to help them like we did. And what are we going to do for these families that just have to accept the excuses they were given, the freak accident, that kind of thing? So thank you so much for your work.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, did you want me to talk about Wes, or was it my turn?
Whatever. Yes, tell about your experience.
Okay, let me
Most people, I think, have seen the movie, but why don't you take it from there?
from the movie, or from just my experience with Wes personally about that. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Wes and I were a young married couple, very much deeply in love, and he chose, he had actually to Buds training, but when he got rolled out of Buds, they said that he was, so qualified and so smart that he was going to fly helicopters, even though he was terrified of heights. So being Wes and, always taking on a challenge, we entered into the community, and when we were choosing a name, we chose 53 because we had a son at the time and he wanted to be around more. That all lasted about probably 12 to 18 months, at which point Wes started coming home, progressively more upset. And he was very frustrated with a state of things that he saw both at Home Guard and at the squadrons overseas, with sort of he called it in the beginning, a lack of pride in their jobs. People were cutting corners, people were not taking their jobs seriously, not considering that the men and women that get in those aircraft are risking it. So slowly he started to stay at work longer, to try and make a specific record of what was going on. And then he would write letters up the chain of command to either get people relieved of their duties, people that, weren't showing the expected kind of oversight, but he didn't get anywhere. And as his greatest fan and his biggest supporter, he wasn't getting any traction from going up the chain of command. So we decided that he was so good at his job, we knew he would be in leadership within a few short years. He was a lieutenant junior grade at the time. So we decided that we would just keep recording everything that was going on. And once he was in a position of leadership, then he could and we could together face the things and say out loud the things that were going wrong that no one else wanted to risk their career, risk losing their 20 years on. Fast forward to 2013, he was the OIC officer in charge of maintenance on his deployment to Korea. And there was when he saw, things had accelerated, the state of the squadron, the state of disrepair that the helicopters were in, the inability of the shops to order new parts, The leadership just valuing up hours, the amount of hours that an aircraft is actually flown in the sky versus that it is airworthy at the time that it flies, was a very large problem. And he was starting to say things like, I need to fix maintenance so I don't die while flying. So again, he kept very good records out there, and he would talk to people. He'd write, he'd leave a paper trail of his efforts. He came home from that deployment in Korea, where he was the maintenance officer, on December 28th. And after a really nice Christmas together, he went to fly his first flight on January 8th. And the helicopter had been frozen the night before, literally frozen, so he couldn't fly the night before because the controls wouldn't even turn on. So when he kissed us goodbye at 4 a.m., he thought he was just going to be back in a couple hours and we'd have a nice day as a family. And a few short hours later, I would receive a text message from a friend who was stationed in Hawaii, letting me know that she saw on the news that his helicopter went down. And if you've seen the movie, then you know the rest of I'll spare you the very tragic and heart-wrenching details for this forum. But suffice it to say that he did, severely dismembered and burned, but he did make it out of the 50-degree water into the hospital. And I got to be there with him when he died of hypothermia. And then that's where my story began. Wes was such a magnetic, just good to the core, morally driven, kind, tender-hearted human. And people just started, even his enlisted guys, people just started reaching out to me saying, everything Wes said was true, Nicole. I can't get stuff for you, but I might know someone who can, which started about a 3-year process of me either receiving things in the mail, someone showing up at my house late at night who just wanted to tell me something verbally. And all those things, once Mike Hicksonbaugh established my trust and we had a good working relationship, then I would bring those things to him. And that's sort of how this got initially put out into the media. We were trying to get attention. My ultimate goal is to not have more people die, to not have another woman at age 26 with 2 babies have to say goodbye to her husband when he went to do a training flight for the day. And I understand that the military and aircraft are inherently dangerous, but the state that we have gotten ourselves to is, in my opinion, deplorable, and not intentionally so. I don't think people mean to do this, but everyone contributes a tiny piece, whether if that's just not paying attention to a small problem, and it creates this culture of neglect that costs good men, incredible men like Wes, the potential for to do greatness. He would have done great things. He would have made this world a better place. And it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit lonelier without him.
Well, Nicole, you made the world a better place. And, when I saw the movie, I said, gosh, we have to give Nicole the Defender of Liberty Award because the courage you had. And when we talked, I was so moved when you told me that he had that you discussed with him in the car the problems and he wanted to cross commission, I guess, out to the Coast Guard to get away from the problems and to tell everyone what happened.
Well, we sort of weighed the options. What does it cost? What does it cost us to, mostly him, because his next the one on the line, but what does it cost us? What do we lose if we don't speak up? What if we see 10 more people die in the same kind of accident and we have information? So given Wes's just natural gifts, his way to connect with people and to just make things happen, and just how talented he was, we decided we would make that commitment to stay in. So my part of that commitment was not getting mad at him when he was gone 18 hours a day, because he had to be at the shop making sure people weren't falsifying things or finding the people that were. So our plan was for him to do that and to stay in till 20, and during which he'd get a position in leadership. We'd request that squadron, and we would make top-down change.
And 2 weeks later was the accident.
Yeah, a week shy of his, 3 weeks shy of his 30th birthday, yeah.
Wow. So I have shown Trish and Connie their Defender of Liberty Award, and we will send you this in the mail tomorrow. But this is can you read it?
Courage is the first, I can't see the let's see.
It says, courage is the first virtue. It makes all the other virtues possible. Which is a paraphrase of Aristotle, who said, without courage, none of the other virtues are possible. So it's the rarest commodity in the world, and that's why we don't have endless opportunities to give out Defender of Liberty awards.
Well, I am deeply humbled and honored. I would argue that your committee is the one that deserves the award. The people that you help support, the issues that you give a voice to and give a platform to, without help and without people who have experience and know-how, these issues, these small everyday issues, would just get overlooked.
Well, thank you, Nicole. You're an inspiration. All 3 of you are you and Connie and Trish are all great Americans, and we can never repay the debt we owe you. And your 3 husbands were among the best and the brightest in their services, and they were victims of institutional negligence and a protracted cover-up, which we will be getting into in the discussion. Tonight, you're going to hear about the fatal connection between design flaws and maintenance failures in the 2 different kinds of aircraft. I was so impressed, as I said, by Nicole's courage, and when I first saw Zach Stauffer's brilliant documentary film, Who Killed Lieutenant Van Dorn, a wonderful title on the movie, Zach. And just as I had been, and Bruce Fein, we went down to Walter Jones' funeral because Walter was unique. There's no one like Walter in the Congress, and we haven't been able to replace him. His commitment to the war power and to oversight. Walter's funeral was very moving, and I think people got a little glimpse of that tonight in Connie and Trish when you said, so we'll be sending you those awards, and we wanted to wrap up the award ceremony now, and before we move to the other part of our program on the film, I wanted to just turn it over to our Vice Chairman Bruce Fein to say a few words, and then we'll go to the next segment.
I had the great honor and privilege of working with Congressman Jones for over 10 years, including on his noble effort to help Connie and Trish unearth the truth from the bowels of the Pentagon. He was tireless. I remember he showed me this memo that the Pentagon asserted justified their withholding even their own internal documents, which showed that pilot error was not the cause of the Osprey crash. And it was a letter between the deputy of the Defense Department and Les Aspin and the chairman saying, well, let's just have a gentleman's agreement that we don't need to turn over any information to you unless the committee votes for it. And Walter said, was that constitutional? I said, no, One member of Congress cannot forfeit your oversight authority. Unfortunately, because of court decisions, it's virtually impossible for a single member of Congress to challenge, claims of privilege that are thrown up all the time by the Defense Department to conceal wrongdoing and error. Anyway, Walter always had the highest regard for Connie and Trish. He spoke admirably of them and their husbands. And of course, we at the committee have given Walter Jones a Defender of Liberty Award. He was truly the last line in Congress. When he left, the heart and soul of Congress has disappeared. One of the reasons why we are in the plight we are in. I don't want to extend anything further. The night belongs to these three grand, lovely women. I would just close by saying the follows. Walter, Connie, Trish, and Nicole. Make them your examples, remembering that courage is the secret of freedom and freedom is the secret of happiness. Do not be daunted by the perils of speaking truth to power. And now let's have a wonderful applause for these wonderful women.
Good. Thank you, Bruce. That was very, very eloquent. Okay, we're ready to begin the second half of our program, and I'd like to introduce you to our talented filmmaker, Zachary Stauffer. And Zach, you take it from here.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John. Thanks to the committee for bringing us all together. This is quite a cool conversation to see that we have about 70 people gathering to kind of talk about this story. A couple of years after we completed the project is pretty great to see. So I'm really appreciative of everybody being here. Chuck Spinney for getting this, making the connection and helping make this possible, and the introduction to John. And congratulations to Nicole, Trish, and Connie as well for all your hard work. I'm going to quickly loop in one of my key partners on this project. But my name is Zach Stauffer. For more than a decade, I was a staff producer and director of photography at the investigative reporting program, which was a small nonprofit newsroom and production facility that we ran out of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And our approach was that of a teaching hospital, where we would be doing important stories that other people weren't doing, and trying to get students into the mix and to develop some skills, get involved, get some credits, get some bylines, things like that. And this would be late 2015, I was kind of looking for another story to sink my teeth into, and it happened to coincide, roughly after one of those students had started popping over to our office and saying, "Hey, I think I might have something that's worth looking into here." And that person was Jason Paladino, who was my associate producer on the project, a very talented investigative reporter himself. And I'll also give a shout out to John Temple, one of our executive producers who's here, who kept us on the straight and narrow for a long reporting process and production process. But we all had a really good partnership for several years as we told this important story. So Jason, I'll let you pick it up from there.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. So I first became aware of what happened and of this issue because one of the other men who died that day on January 8th was a close friend of mine who I grew up with in Truckee, California, north of Lake Tahoe. And his name was Brian Collins. And when he died, my initial reaction was that this is tragic, but also, the military is dangerous and helicopters are dangerous. And I personally never wanted him to join, and I was furious and heartbroken. But I didn't really think much more of it until I went to his funeral. And at his funeral, I started meeting people who were in the same helicopter squadron as him, who were from the area, and the things that they were telling me were wild and sort of changed the way that I thought about the accident from just a sort of random tragic thing to the result of some type of scandal or something that could have easily been prevented if people had been listening. So from there, I just started digging in and reading everything I could about the 53E helicopters, about their history. I quickly found that there was only one reporter who was really writing about these helicopters, a guy named Mike Hicksonbaugh, who I don't believe is on the call, but he had written about this crash and about some other crashes that had occurred with the helicopter. And he was in touch with Nicole, I think pretty soon after this. And so I basically said, look, I've got people telling me things and showing me documents that would be very helpful to this investigation. Do you want to just partner up? And that partnership turned into a dozen or so stories in the Virginia pilot, and then a fellowship at the investigative reporting program, where Zach saw potential in the story that we were unraveling being a documentary film. And one that, didn't just take on one helicopter crash, but looked at not just every helicopter crash of this type of aircraft, but also the entire military industrial complex and the very, very complicated system that led to this crash. So I'll throw it back to Zach.
Yeah, I think that's one of those. There's kind of a couple critical things that I realized early on. We're trying to make it more than a regional newspaper story and something that's really going to expand beyond this one situation. IRP was instrumental in exposing, providing additional coverage, bigger platform, doing a story for NBC Nightly News, which fortunately aired just a couple days before Brian Williams's saga with the Chinook helicopter ran, because if that had happened beforehand, our story might never have run. But the military industrial complex is one of those things that's in boldface in high school history textbooks, if you're lucky, but it's never actually defined what it is. You kind of know that Dwight Eisenhower made this speech, but that's it. And a couple conversations into my reporting, some folks who you'll hear from later were adamant, like, look, we've seen this all before. Like this helicopter story is a way to drill down into some critical issues. And I just wanted that's the public service that I thought thing for people and make it possible to understand. The other aspect, and a sort of a critical article that I read early on, was something by James Fallows in the Atlantic called "The Tragedy of the Military," and it was about the disconnect between civilians and folks in the military. We're just totally detached. It's all out of sight, out of mind. And I thought that if our film could bring to the attention of viewers, most of whom have no military background, if they can really see these folks as human beings, not kind of cookie cutter heroes that we actually know nothing about, but that could be an additional service of the film. And not only talking to Nicole and her family's experience and Susan Van Dorn appeared on camera, a critical person for us was Chris Humme, who's on this call here as well. Just ordinary helicopter mechanic, somebody who I would not have met otherwise if not for this story, but he too showed an incredible amount of courage to speak up about issues. Dylan Boone, one of the survivors of the crash, had the courage to share his story on camera and make himself vulnerable for people in ways that we're unaccustomed to seeing. So my job is easy when there's great storytellers involved and who are eager to share and get the word out about their own experience. So I'm deeply appreciative of everybody who participated in the project.
Well, thanks, Zach. It's really a brilliant film, and I think most people have seen it, but if you haven't, see it and recommend it to your friends. Catherine, if you can unmute now, I want to introduce you to Salon member Catherine Waller, who is working with us on documentary films that deal with the committee's issues. We found that films with the pandemic, people are watching more films, and so films are a great way to get into our subject matter. And Catherine, if you're unmuted, you can jump in here.
Yes, thank you. Well, and I was very impressed with, I believe it was your first film, Coup 53, which you showed a few weeks ago. But I would say congratulations.
That wasn't mine.
No, she meant the committee.
Oh, the committee. Okay.
That was just that was the beginning of the committee and documentary films. But I would congratulate you, Zach, because it seemed to me, first of all, in the beginning of the film, when the crawl, my country has built me the finest aircraft known to man, and then goes into the litany of what's happened with that finest aircraft. And I felt as naive as those midshipmen and young pilots, because you tell a story that's so complicated, and yet I was so involved. And the combination of as you said, the individual stories with all the, all the machinations of the military. And I just thought it was terribly well told, all the way through, and so involving at the same time. So I think you did a great job, and we really need to see films like this. And congratulations! I want to see what you do next.
Thanks.
Yeah, we want to support you, Zach, and anything you want to do going forward. This is such a great job. I think Chris is here, Zach. And,
Yeah, he's around somewhere. Chris, you want to?
Chris, can you jump in here and tell people? They probably remember you from the film, but you can.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Where do you want me to start? I'm just a guest.
Well, we want you to tell the story from your perspective.
I was enlisted, so I was not an officer. I did not go to a military academy or anything like that. I did join later in life. I was 28 by the time I got to the squadron. I considered myself a decently intelligent person, and just kind of figured out that it wasn't really that hard to advance quickly. So I would say within 15 months of being out of boot camp, I was an E5, which doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. It's the definition of middle management, I guess you could say. And the big difference between me and a lot of other E5s, though, was many E5s had 12 to 13, 14 years of experience. I did not. So I made it very clear in some meetings at times that maybe I wasn't the guy to come up with the plan for something, because despite rank, I'd only been in a little bit. So I was kind of forced to dive into our technical publications, our pubs, for learning maintenance. And I learned really, really quickly that you did not have to know how to fix everything. You just had to know where to find it. And that was something that I kind of prided myself in, that I drilled relentlessly into a lot of my guys' heads. When I say guys, I mean the men and women that work alongside me, under me, however you want to word it, our fellow maintainers. And it just got to the point where I started learning and advancing and was doing the extra things outside of my everyday job that was getting me the appropriate evals to keep advancing and keep getting noticed. And then next thing you know, I'm, me and another, I would say probably one, maybe two other petty officers were basically running the 110 work center, which is the power plants. We maintained engines, drive shafts, gearboxes, the blades on the birds, that stuff. And fuel cells, anything fuel related. And I just started kind of noticing that historically there was a very, I don't want to, it's kind of an overplayed term when you hear someone say, oh, it was like the Wild West, but it really was a lot like that in some scenarios. And it wasn't, I think Nicole said it kind of well when she said it wasn't malicious. It was a lot of it was we couldn't get parts for things and we had to make things work. I remember one of the first little detachments we did was a international exercise they do every other year in San Diego called RIMPAC. We were at that. We needed gaskets for these fuel filters, and at this point, I was not a CDI, which is basically a certified inspector of work. At that point, I was still very much a worker, and I remember very clearly the first time that we couldn't get these gaskets we needed. It was basically, we'll just grab one of those blue Navy folders, which if anybody's ever seen them, they're a very, very thick felt. I wouldn't call them just paper, but we made gaskets for these fuel filters out of a navy blue folder, which to me, as a almost 30-year-old man that was pretty familiar with mechanics, thought was insane that's what we were resorting to. But just kind of an example of that. And it was you didn't always have the right sling to hoist an engine in the right way, so you would use ratchet straps in a 2x4 or just good old grit and muscle strength sometimes. And there was a lot of people. It wasn't just everyone, but there was a lot of people that were like, okay, we need to stop, ask permission, get approval for this. But it kind of sliced away. It was like death by 1,000 cuts, kind of, that it just kind of, it slowly, when for a lack of better words, when shit hit the fan, it was kind of like almost do it now and we can kind of get approval later. And and then we started cannibalizing parts off aircraft. That cannibalizing parts is where, let's say I've got an aircraft that is in a non-flight status, sitting in a hangar, torn to a million pieces, and I need, name the part, but it's not anywhere in the system. It's what's called, like if you go to do a stock check on it in the system, it's what's called terminal. Basically means you can ask for it, but you'll never get it. There might be one on a boat somewhere in the South Pacific, but that's it. And usually the Marines took precedence over us because they were usually in combat status or much riskier situations than we were. And, so we started taking parts from aircrafts, and I didn't really know much about this at the time. Anybody familiar with aviation maintenance, there's the NAMP, which is basically kind of the Bible that we have to follow for maintenance. And as you start learning and just reading and coming across different things, as you kind of just gain leadership positions of stuff you're expected to know, you start learning like, wow, we've been doing that wrong. Like, that's totally wrong. And then you bring it to someone's attention and they tell you, oh yeah, but in this other book, it tells you it's okay to do this, so we go by that one. And then you would ask about, well, what do I do about the discrepancy between the two publications? And it'd be like, well, you can fill out a TPDR, Technical Publication Discrepancy Report. Well, you feel like, yay, I solved something. I'm really doing something good there. Well, then you find out from quality assurance that there are currently 680 outstanding technical publication discrepancy reports, which basically means there are almost 700 instances where while working on the aircraft, we figure out that no engineer has come up with a solution for the problem that we're experiencing in the field. And maybe they'll get around to maybe addressing it whenever someone does. I don't know the number of people responsible for addressing those. If it's one guy, 20 guys, no clue. I remember after the crash, I was kind of charged with walking through a bunch of the engineers through the aircraft. And whenever we were going through these huge inspections on the aircraft, we had like a little orange tape or painter's tape, masking tape kind of stuff. And we would tag everywhere in the helicopter where we found a line touching a wire or a hydraulic line touching a fuel line or something touching a rib of the aircraft. And it looked like, you know, if you ever go to those bars in Pensacola and you see all the dollar bills hanging from the ceiling, that's what it looked like with painter's tape of all these incorrect contact points. And a lot of it, you know, isn't something that you would just see on an everyday inspection. You know, the aircraft itself is kind of like an empty Coke can, a little stronger than that, obviously, but same concept. And when it's just flying, there's nothing wrong. But when you start towing these giant things through the ocean, kind of puts a little torque on the frame. And so something that you're looking at on the ground with flashlights doing our after flight inspections, you don't see, you know, that bird gets up in the air and it starts towing and twists, and all of these things are touching and rubbing. And to find a lot of these discrepancies, we were using like the dental mirrors with flashlights, with hydraulic fluid dripping in your eyes, and just impossible conditions to do these inspections. But either way, I remember standing there with it was like the electrical engineer, the fuel line engineer, and like the hydraulic line guy. And they had all worked on these aircraft for decades. And you could just see the awe, like they were blown away, and they're just standing in the bird. And I remember kind of said to them, I said, "Have y'all ever stood in the aircraft all together?" And they were kind of like, "Not like this." And it was the perfect example of all these different systems. You know, when this bird came out 30 years ago, it didn't have all these blue force tracking and different, you know, vibe sensors and all these different things that as the decades go by, well, we'll just add this to the bird. Well, we'll just come up with a fix for it and add this. Well, next thing you know, you've got, you know, a just spider web of dangerous shit from one end of the bird to the other. And no one ever thought about how they were going to make that possible, I don't think. And so as time goes by, and you know, again, a lot of it, we didn't have the 30,000 foot view. It was above our pay grade. We didn't understand the possible sundowning and changing over to different things for the mine countermeasure stuff. And then because of that, the whole supply system goes away and different funding issues. All we knew is we couldn't get parts. We couldn't get anything. You'd get a new part from supply and you'd open the box and it'd be like the manufacturer warranty placard on it expired in like 1987. You know, stuff like that. So I started bringing some things to some people's attention. I kind of got told that, oh, we're not really doing anything wrong. Very, very frequently got told that, well, it says we can do this in this book, so we're going to follow that book. That was kind of the go-to. Other times I just got basically told to, you know, it's above your pay grade. You don't have to know the details. And it goes back to the old adage. They always tell you that everybody can always stop maintenance. That's not true. You know, Nicole referenced the helicopters freezing. I remember that that morning we went into work. It was so cold. It was zero. It was zero outside. And we're out there pre-flighting the birds, and I remember you know, they called us out to the aircraft because pilots always do like a pre-flight inspection where they look at everything very closely, and basically there was ice on the side of the engine on very small worm gear. It was kind of one of those things we kind of wanted to see how it would unfold once we kind of fired some stuff up and maybe see if some heat would kind of help. And once the aircraft was up and running, you know, gauges were not showing what they were supposed to show based on where levers were and things like that. And we finally took the worm gear, the cover for the worm gear off of the side of the fuel controls, and you could actually see there was chunks of ice, you know, in the controls for fuel flow and angle, all that. And it was kind of one of those deals where we shut down, and I knew that I was going to go have to talk to maintenance control, which is basically a group of chiefs that kind of run maintenance, and their number one concern is go birds, like go birds. And so I went to quality assurance, QA. QA is kind of like I guess you could call it, they're the hall monitors of the whole aviation deal there. And I went and I grabbed 81 Craver and AM1 Freitas. And I said, I need y'all to come with me because I'm about to tell maintenance that we're down for the day, and that's not going to go over well, because we just know it's not. So basically I was going for backup. Feel free to cut me off if I'm rambling.
I think what people just should know is, like, you were the person, all these maintenance issues, you were, maybe just quickly tell folks, you were the first person that signed off on Van Dorn's bird. Because of this, there's all this pressure to get the aircraft up, right? Is the constant go. And
and so, we basically, they kind of confirmed, we shut down the flight schedule for that day. And then the solution for these frozen aircraft was, I'll never forget, maintenance master chief, who's basically the master chief of maintenance. I would say probably the highest enlisted guy in the actual, like, office of, hey, let's go out and fly today. He looked at us and he asked us if we could set heat lamps up, and I with like electrical cords and literal heat lamps. And this is, up on multi-million-dollar aircraft with helicopter blades that cost God knows what. And we all just were kind of like, is there a written procedure for that? And it was almost looked at like we were being, smart asses or whatever, but really, like, that was the solution, was to just put some heat lamps on these aircraft and get them to the point where we can get them go. Like, it was just ridiculous. So they bring the aircraft inside. We pretty much know, no, we're not doing that. So they bring the aircraft inside, into the hangars, and, they're starting to kind of thaw out or whatever. Well, the next morning, it's the same weather. It wasn't really any different, but the birds were inside. So all the water had kind of thawed and dripped off of them. So pull the birds out, fire them up. I remember we fire everything up, and I'm sitting in it's like the shotgun seat, basically. It's a little pop-up seat that sits in between the two pilots. And Wes was on my right. And we're kind of rattling off, the lingo, the mumbo jumbo of, NG, blah, 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 all the different controls and where they should be, and engine temperature and all that. And he kind of looks at me and he just says, just tell me this shit's good. And I slapped him on the back and said it was good. And I hopped out and I ran inside and signed off the maps that I had to sign off. No bird could move with an outstanding maintenance action form. So got it signed off, and then it's up to maintenance control to actually give the yes or no on whether it's, safe for flight, clear to take off. So I go back inside, and I'm signing off some other stuff on some other birds. And I mean, I guess time, you don't really think about the time. I don't feel like it was that long. I know it was obviously a lot sooner than it was on the news, or sooner than people were texting each other. But one of my guys, Butler, was in maintenance, looking something up, and he came running back, and he said, he popped in the shop and there was nobody in there, me and him. And he said 4 3s in the water. And it didn't even like click. It didn't even make sense. And then you just instantly, you've got an instant protocol you got to follow. You've got to start pulling out your toolboxes. You've got to start printing everything that is in relation to that bird and getting it ready, because that very soon, very quickly, inspectors are coming to gather all of this stuff. and they want to know where everything is, all parts, all tools. You know, they're going to come take everything, and you have to have it ready. So you just start doing that, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And God, it was so cold.
Well, Chris, it must have been, you know, extremely traumatic for you, and it's really valuable. You know, what everything you're telling us, it really gives you a very concrete sense of what the maintenance issues were. And so thank you so much. It was really very helpful. And then you got drummed out, right, of the service. Is that right?
Yeah, the film kind of talks about that a little bit. At the end of the day, there are, you know, my DD 214 still says under honorable conditions, but there are definitely still some negative ramifications of the way that I got out. I do not have any of my GI benefits. I do not have the GI Bill. I do not have any of that, which I could talk about for a while as far as how we got to that point. But at the end of the day, after the accident, I went from a very well received leader in the community to, in the words of my commanding officer, a cancer in the span of 10 months.
I can understand that.
In hindsight, I was screwed up, and I should not have been working on aircraft. There was no therapy for us. There's 2 hangars at the squadron. There was therapists and counselors and all of this for pilots and aircrew. Maintainers, it was, you know, get back to work. This is literally the meeting that we had the morning after was, this is part of aviation. You just move on.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. It was really, we've got to move on. We've got Nicole, if you want to jump in, or Connie or Trish at any point, please do. Otherwise, we're going to move now to the our big picture Pentagon insiders, Pierre and Chuck Spinney here. Zach was very smart to have picked you guys because, you know, I thought in the film, just like Kinzer provided the framework in the Coup 53 story, which really made it happen, you guys really provided the framework that we really want to learn about. You guys are very unique individuals, and Zach couldn't have found anybody better than Chuck and Pierre to explain these design flaws and maintenance failures, how they're par for the course in our military services. So Chuck and Pierre, over to you. I think, Chuck, you're muted. Chuck.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, got you now.
Yeah. I'll go, and then Pierre goes. I'm going to try to be brief because the movie pretty accurately described a lot of the my comments in there were extremely well edited, probably better than any other show I've ever been on, and I've been on a bunch of them. So kudos for Zach for doing a great job. And Chris basically just gave you an insight into the real problem of that we were fighting against. You know, if you recall in the movie, Captain Flannery, when he was discussing the problems of CH-53 readiness, he just made a passing statement that it's a bill payer. In other words, it's not my fault, it's a bill payer. I'm not getting the money, my money's going somewhere else. Well, that was, in one sense, it was a true statement, but it also is very indicative of the pathologies in the Pentagon. What he didn't say is that at the time, our budgets were huge. It wasn't like they didn't have money. The reason it was a bill payer is because they stuffed the procurement and R&D budgets so full of stuff, they had to rob the readiness accounts to fund them. And the stuff that it was being stuffed with were things like the F-35, which were underfunded. Same situation exists today as we're moving toward Cold War II. If you look at all you need to do is look at the defense press and look at what's being written about. It's just all this new stuff. Meanwhile, they've released reports recently talking about how bad readiness is. We're in the middle of a so-called war on terror, and readiness is terrible. You know, the other aspect I would say is, you know, when you had General Davis in the movie, basically when he was trying to waffle on Zach's questions, he basically said, well, there were budget challenges. Well, there's always budget challenges because of the way the Pentagon puts together the budget. They're created deliberately. And essentially it makes it possible to rob the readiness accounts, of which you just had a stellar example of the effect of that. I've met guys like him, like Chris Humme, since the 1970s. And when I was working in the Pentagon, I'd go out on tours to bases to try to understand the readiness problems. And the first thing is you get an escort officer that would try to keep you from talking to guys like Chris. But there are so many of those guys out there. You eventually get to have you get to have a good picture. Now, I think that the things I'm talking about are explained pretty clearly in the movie, and I don't need to take up everybody's time repeating them. So I think that's about all I have to say.
Thanks, Chuck. Pierre?
If I could ask a question of Chuck, John.
Yeah,
Chuck,
sure.
how would you rate the congressional oversight of
It's ridiculous.
procurement?
It's absolutely silly. It's not just congressional oversight of procurement, it's even worse for readiness because Congress has a vested interest in the Pentagon's game of pumping up the defense budget by misallocating funds away from the operating accounts into the R&D and procurement account. And it's gotten worse. I mean, it's worse now than it was in the 70s. Let me give you an example of a memorable event. You may remember this. Back in 1978 or so, it might have been 77, might have been 79, Harold Brown, the Secretary of Defense, was testifying on F-111D readiness. Now that was an issue I was very close to. The F-111D was basically the Joint Strike Fighter of its day. It had all the same kind of problems. And it was unsupportable, and they literally delivered. They were sitting on the ramp for 2 years without any avionics because they couldn't make the avionics work. Sort of like the software in the JSF today. And anyway, Congressman Jack Edwards was grilling Brown on F-111 readiness. Now, what Brown unfortunately didn't know is that Edwards had a tiger of a staffer named Charlie Murphy. And Murphy had just been out the Cannon Air Force Base, and he managed to avoid the caretakers. And one of his caretakers was actually given a wad of money by legislative affairs to keep him in Mexican restaurants and not let him near the flight line. I kid you not, that's a true story. And Murphy anyway escaped, and he got out on the flight line, and he finds out there's no spare parts. That's why they're all grounded, just like Chris is talking about. And the sergeants, guys like Chris was a petty officer, sergeants in the Air Force, the sergeants were going to Radio Shack with their own money to buy electronic parts to try to get that plane flying. And Charlie came back, gave the information to Edwards. Edwards dumped it on Brown after Brown had said everything's working fine, and it went worldwide. It caused an enormous ruckus. That little factor did more to increase pressure to improve readiness in the 70s than probably any other single event. That's the kind of stuff you have to put up with to solve what Captain Todd Flannery dismisses as a bill payer problem, or what General Davis dismissed as a budget challenge.
We talked to somebody at a Marine Corps 53 squadron in Hawaii who described friends of his. They ran out to pull a auxiliary fuel tank off of 53D out at the gate like one of the museum aircraft that was parked out front, for people passing by to see. They grab this tank at 3 a.m. or something, go put it on a 53E, realize it's a different color paint. So they're never going to be able to pass this off as a 53E part. And then they ran it back under the cover of night to put it back on the museum aircraft, as yet another illustration of how desperate the maintenance crews were.
We were doing that in Vietnam, Zach, with Bombay doors for F-105s. We were going to, they were getting so busted up, they ran out of them and they had to take them off museum pieces.
Zach, you want to hear something crazy, Zach?
Sure.
I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you. When we were in Korea, there was the aircraft that crashed in Korea and burned. We sifted through the ashes of that to pull screws out that screwed the windscreen in the aircraft. We sifted through the ashes of that bird to get usable parts.
Well, Chris, that happened all the time in the 70s. This is not a new problem. You were just on the receiving end of it.
So Pierre, go ahead.
All right.
Jump in here.
John? Hello?
Yes, it's Mark. I wondered if I should mention the NASA Challenger story in connection with this.
Well, let's let Pierre jump in here, and then we'll come back to that.
Sure.
Chuck has made it very obvious that the Navy and the Marine Corps, and of course the other services too, prioritize budget over the safety of their people. And for them, budget, that is the buying of new weapons, is more important than the lives of their troops, their pilots, and more important than their skills and their training. That's very clear. And that's the larger story of the documentary. You're seeing the effect, the tragic effect of that totally misguided priority. But there's another aspect to this that's hinted at by what Chris and Wes had to say in the film. And that is, we're not only dealing with safety and training and skills, we're dealing with whether these weapons, these aircraft and other weapons, can actually go to war. Mm-hmm. And the same priority holds. The services prefer to spend money on weapons to getting them ready to go to war and able to go to war and be able to prevail in conflict. That's the sad truth. And you can see it in very specific examples in the film. Chris talks at one point, I think, for me, in a very direct, obvious way. He talks about how great it is to see 4 of these helicopters take off at once. It's such a rare event. It's so hard to get it done that to see 4 of them is a thrill. Now that's in a squadron of 12 helicopters. And it's like a thrilling, rare, once every few months event to get 4 of them into the air. Now think about what that means for combat. The other, exactly the same thing is Wes's observation from his diary, that they couldn't get 4 airplanes across the country, that they were lucky if they took off with 4 airplanes and got 1 or 2 to the West Coast for that exercise that Nicole mentioned. Now think about what that means in wartime. What was the mission of Wes's squadron? The mission of Wes's squadron was to clear mines from places like the Strait of Hormuz or the Arabian Sea. If there was a problem with Iran and they decided to strangle the oil flow by mining the approaches of the Arabian Sea and the Straits of Hormuz, Wes's squadron, their job was to get over there and clear those mines. Now think about that, with helicopters that can't get across the country, with helicopters where it's hard to ever see 4 of them fly together. And if you want to see the numbers, they're flying those helicopters at best 10 or 12 hours a month. That means they're getting 20 minutes a day out of these helicopters. Now, imagine the size of the Arabian Sea and the Straits of Hormuz mined, thousands of mines that are right now in the Iranian inventory. That would take weeks, if not months, of all-day flying by these Sea Dragon helicopters, towing their sled to, to disable, countermeasure, or blow up these mines, towing them at 25 knots. This isn't fast work, right? Sweeping those vast expanses of sea. That's an airplane in peacetime. It flies 20 minutes a day. And if they're lucky in combat, it might fly 30 minutes a day. It's a hopeless task that's been given to these people. Why? Because the generals and their allies in industry would rather spend money on new weapons. And then think about, what are the new weapons we're talking about? What were the weapons that were shortchanging Wes and his squadron? Those weapons were the F-35, an airplane that no matter how much they spend on it, will never be able to do at least 2 out of its 3 missions. Will never be able to do adequate close support. It will never be able to do decent air-to-air combat. No matter what they do to it, no matter how many times they fix the software, it won't work. They were taking that money out of Wes's squadron for the literal combat ship, a ship that had 3 missions assigned, none of which it can commit to, it can actually execute today. And we built over 30 of them. This was a ship that was supposed to cost 400 million or so and wound up costing just short of $1 billion and can't do any of its 3 missions. And we're stuck with 30 of them. And Wes's squadron was paying for that. And of course, they were paying for V-22s, which, as opposed to the CH-53, the V-22 is basically an unfixable airplane. Had that been tested honestly, long before the operational tests that took the lives of Trish's and Connie's husbands, if that had been tested honestly, it would have never even gone to operational tests, because it was clear that there were problems with it that would never make it safe to bring soldiers into a combat landing zone. It couldn't possibly land in a zone like a Huey did, like an ancient Huey would get you in and out safer than a V-22. V-22s were sucking up the money from Wes's Sea Dragon squadron. And then we could go on. There's the Ford carrier, that if it ever works, will cost 50% more than the last carrier and maybe work worse. And most ironic of all, a replacement for the Sea Dragon and for the CH-53, the Super Stallion, is being bought right now, the CH-53K, that's even worse than the C-53E. And the C-53E was the single worst accident rate of any helicopter in any service. These are the things that were sucking up the money that made it impossible for Wes to do his job. And as Chuck said, that's just for a small mission, and by the way, a mission that the Navy despises, minesweeping. Think of it, this applies to essentially all our missions across the board. And now you have the irony of the services and the politicians yelling and screaming to do exactly what they wanted to do to the CH-53 and to the MH-53, that is steal their maintenance money. Now they're talking about shutting down legacy airplanes. Why? To buy more of this stuff that doesn't work. This is a system that's horrendously broken, and that beyond the shadow of a doubt, more money will make it worse. In fact, the only beginnings to ever make any decent headway in the system is to cut the money and to insist on combat capability.
John, can I ask Pierre a question? Pierre, Would you attribute the disaster that happened, with Jimmy Carter's first attempt at a rescue mission of our hostages in Tehran and the crashes of the helicopters, and you think those malfunctions were caused in whole or in part by the kinds of perverse incentives that you've described?
I can't answer that question in detail because I never looked at the actual training that took place. It was clear that the training was inadequate. Those people had, I was working in Iran at the time, or shortly before that time, so I know Iranian conditions. Those people had no idea of what a sandstorm in Iran is like. And everybody who's ever flown in Iran knows about sandstorms. So obviously the training was inadequate. Whether it was inadequate because of lack of budget, that I can't say. I can't track it back to lack of budget. I can certainly tell you they didn't train adequately for the mission. And very possibly if they trained adequately for it, they would have told Carter that it can't be done.
We've got Andrew Cockburn, who's got a good connection in Belize, and Dan Grazier here. Can you guys jump in?
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on one thing that Connie mentioned it, and it's also through the film, which is the standard, one of the many disgusting sort of aspects of the whole military behavior, the Pentagon's behavior on this sort of thing, is to blame the pilots. It's very, I've come across it so many times when there's, something a disaster happens for reasons that have been explained very eloquently throughout this meeting. They turn around and blame, they fob it off, they blame their own men or women. For example, I was thinking of another example, just came to mind, was in 2014, I believe it was, there was a disaster in Afghanistan where a B-1 bomber, through the total inadequacies of the B-1 system and a totally ill-planned mission, killed 5 Americans and 1 Afghan, 6 coalition soldiers. It bombed them. The next day, I was informed a friend of mine who was a retired general officer was shopping in the commissary at Fort Myer, and he ran into a friend of his, an acquaintance of his, who was a former chief of staff of the Air Force, and he said to the air general, "God, that was a terrible thing. Looks like something really went badly wrong with the B-1." And to which this retired 4-star, he grabbed his arm and said, "We have to protect the platform. We have to protect the platform." And that's always the mentality. Protect and by the platform, read budget. That is as Pierre was talking about just now, that is always the priority, is to protect the budget, which means protect whatever gimcrack system they've spent the money on, purported to spend the money on. It happened with, Connie and Trish's husband, and it happened again with the helicopter, and that's what they always do. And it just shows how little they really are, they, by which I mean the presiding powers in the military industrial complex, are interested in warfare. If you want to be competent, in a military way, obviously, your greatest strength are your fighters, the people in your armed forces. And the fact that they treat them with such contempt in this way routinely, I think is, something that people ought to more generally realize. And I fault the press for not sort of always calling them out on this. And it's great that, we, at least with Zach's film and with, the story of the V-22, that, the truth does eventually surface, but not often enough. I'll leave it at that.
John, can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, and then I will make my point.
My name's Jeff Stidham. I was involved in a 19 November 84 C-53 crash. I was with Bravo Battery Battalion 10th Marines. We flew with HMH 464. Captain Brian Jones was killed in that crash. I spent a month in the hospital after that crash. And I can tell you, it wasn't just the air crews that were treated like shit. It was us also. Anytime we spoke up, we were shut down. Anything that went wrong, we were shut down. We were never, we were cast aside. So I talked to Zach right as the film came out. I hesitated, I faltered on getting back a hold of him, and one of the air crew's sisters, he was a crew chief, he was killed, Scott McEnany.
I'm here, Jeff.
Hey, how are you, honey?
Hey, hey.
This is tough, man. It's really tough.
Amy, you had put something on the chat that you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I believe in 2019, actually, I believe I had a phone conversation with Zachary, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, yes, when my brother was killed, he was crew chief on Jeff's CH-53 helicopter, November 19th, 1984. And I was only 20, and I was still living home with my parents, and my parents and our family was very, very patriotic. So they didn't question anything. Whatever was delivered to them, whatever message was given to them, they accepted it. They did not question it. And it was in my adult years, meaning older, obviously on my own, and my 30s, my 40s, when I started to search the internet. What in 1984, I didn't have we didn't have the internet. So, but it wasn't, until, after I had access to the internet, did I start to search out, and I start to type in HMH 464, which was Jeff's and my brother's squadron. And I started trying to find people and trying to ask questions. And Jeff and I found each other. I can't remember which site it was on. We have each other's phone numbers. I'm sorry, Jeff.
Generaldisasters.com.
Oh, okay. So obviously Jeff knows more of the story than I know, but when I watched Who Killed Lieutenant Van Dorn's documentary, there was two main issues: the wires that were bound by the zip tie rubbing up against and creating a fire in the cabin, if I'm not mistaken, and then my brother and Jeff's helicopter was the other one mentioned, which was that rear rotator cuff. Right, Jeff?
Yeah, I got something to add about that too. I talked to he's now deceased. He died of a rare brain cancer
Mike LaRouche. Mike LaRouche.
You know him. Mike and your brother were very good friends. I met Mike about 4 years ago, maybe 5. He said those couplings were switched out in the middle of the night because there was an improper heat treat done on those couplings where the tail rotor folded for storage. Those were switched out in the middle of the night. Mike LaRouche, who's now dead, he can't say anything now, told me they switched those out in the middle of the night.
Which led to the crash.
They were doing, from
that
my
was
understanding,
after,
they were doing, go ahead.
it was after the fact. that those were switched out.
Wow. Bill Nitze, you wanted
From
to
my
jump in
understanding,
here.
from my understanding, they were doing night vision training, and I think the crash happened at 1 or 2 in the morning, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff.
My
But I'm
my
sorry.
crash? My crash?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
We were told that it
was 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
afternoon. I'm sorry. We were told at 2 o'clock in the morning because it was coming on the news at 6 o'clock, 4 hours later. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
But I was told, or we were told that those rotator cuffs were made out of a certain kind of metal that wasn't pliable enough, and supposedly they've switched out the metal to be a more, tolerant metal. So I don't know if that ever happened. I don't know if that's even true.
Mike told me the heat treating on those couplers were bad. The hardness, it was either too brittle or too soft, one or the other.
Yes.
I don't remember.
Yes. And they've been since switched out, supposedly. I don't know.
Bill, we're gonna run out of time here, so we've got a few more people we have to get to. So go ahead, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
I'll be very brief.
Jeff.
We need to find a way to make a difference on this issue more broadly, because we have a massive institutional and cultural failure here. And it has 2 terrible consequences. The first is we're unnecessarily losing lives and jeopardizing the careers and contributions of the most valuable people we have in our military. Secondly, partially as a result, we can't fight a war. And there has to be a way that we can get some engagement on this broader issue, which cuts across the whole national security establishment. That's probably a longer discussion that we don't have time for right now, but it's, in my view, something the committee has to do.
Couldn't agree more.
Agree also.
One of the places to start is with Congress. We need real oversight, something like the Truman Commission during World War II or something.
You couldn't get it with this Congress. Impossible.
I agree.
I'm someone like Sheldon Whitehouse, for example, might actually be willing to begin to take this on. I would not be so pessimistic.
And he might well, I totally agree. And they would come down on him like a ton of bricks.
Well, he's proven that he's willing to take on some really nasty propositions.
No, I agree.
I'll be there.
So we'll have Dan Grazier. We're gonna we've been talking about the F-35 and maybe doing a separate salon on that. Do you want to jump in here before we sign off?
Sure. Yeah. The F-35 is a whole different story, and we can spend a long time talking about that one. But Nicole really brought up the most salient and important point about this entire discussion, which is the corrosive effect of all of these systemic problems in the military-industrial congressional complex on military leadership. And because the entire system is set up to basically protect itself. It's not to win wars. The military-industrial congressional complex is set up to protect itself. And so anybody who interferes with that, or who steps out of line, or who threatens the system is quickly run out. And that causes this cascading effect on military leadership, because the people who do have the courage to, the most important virtue, to speak up and to highlight these problems, they're exactly the kind of people that you need to lead troops in combat. but these are the people that the system is designed to weed out, actually. And so what you have left is you have a lot of careerists who are out for their own aggrandizement, and they do that by promoting the corporate interests of the military service. And so and then what that does is you can Google toxic leadership in the military, and you'll come up with all kinds of results. There's lots of things written about this, but the reason that exists is because those are the county officers that the system produces, and it has this devastating effect on morale in the ranks, because a careerist can he can really run his troops ragged, and anybody who served in the service knows that this is possible. And I was a Marine Corps officer, and I saw this. I was on the receiving end of it, and I saw some of my counterparts doing this in my time in the Marine Corps, where they would run their troops ragged. I had a fellow captain who put 2 lieutenants into rehab because they were drinking so much after hours to overcome the stress that he was putting on them. And so that's one of the most important parts of this whole discussion, is that it wastes a ton of money, but it also breaks a lot of really good people. And Connie and Trish and Nicole are obvious examples of that. They're definitely victims of the military-industrial congressional complex, but for Chris and Jeff and anyone else who served in the military, I'm sure that plenty of guys that did their time in the in the Marine Corps, in the Navy, in the Army, and they've been devastated by their experiences, because the system put bad officers over top of them, because that's what the system promotes and rewards.
Yep. Del Spurlock. Del is on our board. Del, jump in here. You've had very relevant experience here.
It was my great honor, John, to have served as Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower for 6 years. From the beginning of my tenure, we were concerned with the issues that we've discussed here tonight. And our response was, in my office, that we would fight for the interjection of human factors into the weapons development system, the maintenance systems, and all the support systems that existed in the military in the Army at that time. I was there for 6 years, and it's only that fact, I think, that allowed me to win some battles in terms of human factors. It was only that fact because I was there for 6 years. The system outweighs anybody who's got any significant interest in changing the system. That's number one. And Trish and Connie and Nicole, I am really deeply appreciative of what you've done, because what you have done is to demonstrate the humanity that does exist in the system to support the young people who are fighting our wars. So I want to correct one thing, though, and I think it's been implied by what Dr. Sprey and Chuck Spinney, who at one time I came to visit with when he's up in OSD. This is a malignant system. This is deliberate. What Dan has indicated is that the system is absolutely designed to sacrifice our human capital, our young people. That's number one. Number two, let me say something a little bit about the way ahead. Bill has raised the issue. Where do we go from here? The new SecDef has a responsibility and absolutely one that he cannot duck. He has a responsibility to restructure the force. We gave up on young people after the Cold War, not just in the military, but across the board. In all our development programs, and whether it's labor or whatever, the fact of the matter is we gave up on them. And clearly those within the military itself, right from the get-go, that was Powell and Cheney in the reorganization or what George Bush asked them to do when looking at the post-Cold War structure. That's when the overt, horrible beginning of contracting, service contracting began. Totally incapable of being monitored. That's when the contractors came in beside our young people, and the organic nature of our support structure, particularly in logistics, dissolved. We right now don't know how to recruit. We don't know how to train. One reason we don't know how to train anymore, even marginally, is because contractors are never interested in training anybody. They're interested in buying the people who were already trained. So we've got tremendous training deficits in the military right now, across the board. I just pay attention to the Army. And so SecDef Austin, in my view, is vulnerable to those sorts of things which compel him to share with the American people how we are going to restructure ourselves, how we are going to deal with reserve structures that are now incapable of mastering the logistic structures that they were designed to do and programmed to do. So that I think that going forward, looking at and forcing a degree of rationality and openness in the way in which the SecDef is going to have to restructure is something that we could focus on.
We're gonna have to light a big fire under him.
Well, we need young people to do it. We need,
he needs some serious heating before he's gonna be any revolutionary.
Yeah, you don't have to be a revolutionary. The issue is whether or not you can put the pressure on him to reveal what's going on.
Well, we should sure try.
So we've combined two events tonight, and I think we've covered a great deal of ground. I have Molly McCartney hasn't had a chance to speak on our board. Bob Randolph, Nucci Courier. So I don't know, and we wanted to let our three award. Nicole and Trish and Connie had the last word. So what, let's wrap up. Nicole, can you?
Is there something specific you want me to say? Or I mean, I have thank you.
Anything. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, and you guys are so inspiring that I think we're all motivated on the board and in our membership to really try to increase our understanding and knowledge of how deep and systemic this problem is, and see what the solutions are.
Make a difference, John. We have to make a difference.
Well, that's music to my ears, I'm sure. I'm sure you know that. I really can't say it enough times. I really think that the problem is a bigger deal than even I'm making it. And if you'll have me anytime you guys have a meeting or you're trying to brainstorm, or if you do want to help with this issue, I would love to be present. And I mean, I'm a novice, but I've learned a ton.
Right.
And,
one of the things we'd like to do, the Zoom, because of the pandemic, we were forced out of the physical location, and now with the Zoom, there are certain advantages that, you know, we could involve you and Trish and Connie, and it was just at the last minute we realized that, you know, you deserved the Defender of Liberty Award, and Connie and Trish, and we threw it together, and we really didn't have time to bring in our other Defender of Liberty Award members, but we're going to do this again in a couple of weeks with the Knight Ritter team, who the journalistic award, and Cy Hirsch was very moved by the movie and asked me, his statement's too long to read, but we'll include it. And Cy was, you know, amazed at what, Nicole, your courage and how you and Connie and Trish have stood up. And Connie, Trish want to say anything before we?
Connie had to jump off. She wasn't feeling well, but I wanted to say that, you know, this is exacerbated because promotions are based on carrying the company line within companies, within the services. And they're really, if somebody does speak out, they're punished in multiple ways, even after death, as you guys have seen tonight. So it is hard to be the one person that stands up and doesn't have a backing by anybody else in a squadron. As Nicole was saying, her husband went home and was waiting to fix, you know, trying to fix things when he got in a position. But, you know, even the people in positions as lieutenant colonels or something can't do it because there's a general overlooking, a colonel and a general overlooking them. So it is in the military, it's going to be systemic because of the promotion, how the promotion system works. And I think that's probably true in companies as well. So, but I'm grateful for you guys taking a moment to honor us. We didn't do it to be honored. We did it because we wanted the record set right for the people we loved. So thank you.
Connie?
Trish, I'm back in here, everybody.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I worked all day. I worked with UNCW and I was on Teams meetings all day. I hadn't eaten. And as soon as I shared with you guys, I had this terrible dizzy spell. I had to go lie down. I don't know. I guess I'm also overwhelmed. I mean, I just can't thank you enough for what you're doing for us. And, you know, for Trish and Nicole. I do want to say though, it is very difficult. It's heartbreaking to go toe to toe with generals, colonels, people that, you know, you admired, you know, your husband did, and, you know, you're simply after the truth. And it was very intimidating, especially when you're 5 feet tall like me. But, you know, it was worth it. I'd do it all again. And again, I just think of all the people, whether it's wives or mothers or whoever is, you know, trying to take up this fight because it's the right thing to do and it's right to ask questions. So again, just thank you for your work. Please continue. And yeah, I'm here to help do whatever I can. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and she's another generation. She'll stand up too. So that, you know, this has been a legacy for our husbands because our children are, you know, they're bold, they're courageous, they're patriotic, and they know the meaning of the truth. So we can say our husbands taught them that, right?
Amen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think
if we can
Bill,
look at the blessings and the good side, that's it. And
I think our
people like
board
you.
thank you so much. I think our board needs to, we should probably set up a working subcommittee, and the three of you could be part of that, and we can try to, you know, get some focus here on this and see where we go. So I hope that's not the cruel acceptance of the casual invitation, but we'd love to love to have you.
We're a team. John, would you care for one concluding parallel story?
Sure.
Concerning NASA and the Challenger disaster, which was long after I stopped working for NASA. and I felt very ashamed of their carelessness. Everybody remembers that was probably the most covered aviation disaster of the space shuttle. And NASA had been rather lax in a lot of things at the time, it seemed to me, as a sort of an alumnus employee. But following the disaster, suddenly all the righteous congressmen and blowhards, they apportioned suddenly, oh, we're going to have a blue ribbon panel, $5 million or so in order to look, and 3 years to investigate. And what they did was they made the mistake of inviting Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize physicist. Do you remember that?
He blew it up for him.
Richard Feynman is a Nobel Prize winner in physics and a genius and somebody that I idolized. And I believe they did this something like on a Wednesday or Thursday, and they appointed Richard Feynman to join the scientific portion. And over the weekend, he went home and did a little shopping, and on Monday, he came into his lecture hall at Caltech, as I remember, with all the press accumulated because he had called them. And he brought along a child's lunch pail, opened it, and what smoked like a modern rock show came out of it. It was all dry ice. He took out 4 tiny little circles, which were frozen, and then each of them was 79 cents, by the way. And he took out a hammer and he shattered all 4 O-rings. To the disbelief of the entire audience of journalists and I believe also directors of NASA, there was a lot of embarrassment, and he said, all of these 4 O-rings were made out of rubber, and no one thought they were going to be used in the environment of outer space around Earth, where the temperature is near absolute zero, and earthly rubber becomes brittle. So what happened is when the shuttle was out in space, the O-rings froze over just like his dry ice, and they became brittle, and all the hot gases on entering the atmosphere came in and killed those 7 brave astronauts, including the woman who I admired so much, forgetting her name right now. Sally Ride?
Sally Ride. Yep.
Sally Ride, yes. All shown not at millions of dollars and hyperbole and breathlessness of hysteria about it, but with clear brilliance and scientific knowledge. He spent a total of about $3.79, plus the cost of a hammer. And as I remember, the lunch pail was his child's.
Well, Zach, maybe that's maybe Zach, that's one of your next film. But
he wanted to use.
Well, it made me kind of ashamed for NASA, and you may have remembered, by the way, that's not only the real blooper or boner of an error they made. I don't know if any of you remember the Mars Global Explorer. That was to go and circle around Mars without landing and survey and map the entire surface. Oh, sure. And it was a $100 million satellite. However, they made an error that a 3rd grader would be reprimanded by the math teacher. The old definition of a genius, you know what a nuclear bomb is? It's a device designed by geniuses to be executed and used by morons. Well, the Mars Global Explorer was designed in the United States using inches and pounds, whereas it was built in England using kilograms and centimeters. So all the components were built to the wrong units of specification, and we lost the $100 million satellite to space, irretrievable and never to be heard from again, because of an error that a 3rd grader would get wrong.
Well, Mark, we've got to end, but Mark is a classmate of mine at Harvard, and Mark was the one NASA that programmed before freshman year what do they call the Voyagers, which are
Voyager
now,
spacecrafts. I was at the Goddard Institute for Space Study in New York, which was NASA's think tank.
Mark was a math genius and programmed before wrote the software, and those vehicles are outside, what is it, the galaxy or the universe?
They're approaching what was not known in 1977 at launching, the Oort cloud, which is the sort of rock, debris, believed to be shell nursery around the entire solar system, from which they believe every comet, asteroid, and meteor originates in the beginning.
Thanks, Mark, for making such an
But
original
I thought when I heard
contribution.
these stories, it was exactly the same in NASA. Another colleague, and by the way, we were on the DARPA net also.
So thank you, everyone. We've gone way beyond the call of duty here, but just unique contributions by everyone. And thank you so much. We'll reconvene soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much. Fun
Connie.
afternoon.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you all.
Bye, all.
Pierre.
Thank you,
Andrew.
ladies, for
you.
bringing this all to us very
Thank
much.
you.
For having us.
Our sympathy
Thank
to
you.
you for what
Thanks,
happened to your
Bill.
husbands.
Well, thank you for inviting us. I've only been trying for 7 years to get some help. Never too late. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You were heroic, ladies.
Real
Thank you.
heroes.